keep me, oh keep me safe. Stuck within this maze encompassing my brain. She walks up to the mountain, looks up towards the clouds. Can't see the pinnacle, but can hear the monsters growl. I don't trust nobody and nobody trusts me. At least that's what I like to think when I start to freak. Shaking on the sofa, bleeding from the soda, dreaming lacrimosa. Demons of the soul start to peel back the layers, break where it tapers. Palm feels these craters of these thieves and traders. I like to say I'm tired, but I really mean I'm weak. Eyes closed, lying motionless, but the voices, they never sleep. I've learned to live without them, but the pills ran dry. They come back with a vengeance. Will I escape this time? Shaking on the sofa, bleeding from the soda, dreaming lacrimosa. Demons of the soul start to peel back the layers, break where it tapers. Palm feels the craters of these thieves and traders. I don't even know if I'm alive or cry. I've been stuck dissociated every night. I've been fucking sick of every song I write. I've been on the verge of tears like all the time. So keep me, oh keep me safe. Stuck within this maze encompassing my brain.
Just let it rain, give me another reason to complain. These clouds never cease to find me, but that's okay because the sunlight's blinding.
So what do you think of this song? Nice weather we're having, as long as you like downpours.
You say see the werewolf in my eyes, and it's a full moon tonight. Well, I haven't changed in some time. We've got a brand new perspective,
And I find granules in my trainers, stuck between my toes.
I keep starting fires and I keep punching walls, but I love my friends. They make me feel alive again. Keep me, oh keep me safe. Stuck within this maze encompassing my brain.
Keep me, oh keep me safe.
Okay, there we go. What the fuck? My microphone does that sometimes, where it just decides to not work, and I have to unplug it and plug it back in again. Whew. All right. Hello, chat. How are we all doing today? Chapter 14 of The Stars and Their Children came out yesterday or 2 days ago, one of the two. And I want to read it. It's a really good story, and it's just I just love reading on stream. Madge, my Wi-Fi is acting up. Oh no, I'm sorry. Also, if you hear me, like, doing things like this, I ordered DoorDash, and it literally, like, arrived, like, 3 minutes before I started stream. I have chicken nuggies and chocolate shake. I don't know if I've ever had a chocolate shake from here before. It kind of tastes like paint. But it was the only option, like, it was the only flavor option on DoorDash, so don't know what that's about. No, it tastes like paint. It's not chalky. I feel like it would be more concerning if the shake was chalky. But hey, it would give a whole new meaning to chalky shake. But okay. I'm so glad that they put napkins in here. Alright. I say we get into this. Also, it's September, so if you've ever considered subscribing, now would be the time to do it, because it's, I don't know, for me it says 30% off, but that's maybe because I have differing situations. I don't know. It was 20% off last year, so I don't know how it is for, like, everyone else. I don't know. Also, subscribe. Well, I don't really have any emotes yet. Or sub badges. Hopefully, I will get onto that soon. I will also be having, like, little breaks in between, like, paragraphs and stuff while I'm eating. But I feel like that's a given. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna bring you closer so I can read chat better. There we go. Alright. I also zoomed in quite a lot more, because I realized that, like, the words on screen are probably barely readable, and if people want to read along, that is no good. Alright. The Stars and Their Children by Bones and the Bees. Also, I never understand what the name in parentheses is. Like, why do they do that on AO3? I guess we'll never know. Also, am I too loud? I feel like I'm too loud in comparison to the music. I'm gonna turn the music up a little bit. I just realized I'm an hour late to my sleep schedule. I'm trying to be healthy. I'm good? Oh, okay. Cool. Chapter 14. Bruises blooming under fists. Summary. The Themesians. That is not a good summary. Give me more, please. Oh yeah, updated September 6th. This one is over 10k words? Oh dear God. I don't know if I'll be able to have the energy to read this all. Maybe with my chicken nuggies and chocolate shake, I'll be able to power through, but we'll see. Usually, if Wilbur spent the day hidden away in the library, there were very few people that tended to bother him. Jack would appear every so often to remind him about mealtime, or if he had been summoned by someone, or Tommy might run in with Amesy and Rombo trailing behind, although that was far less common these days. But otherwise, the library was his private space. Not as private as his room, of course, but it was the closest thing he could find to a place of solace in the palace during the day, or solace, or whatever, however you say it. He could huddle up in the corner with a history book on his lap, and for at least a few hours, the storm in his mind would reach a lull. Not enough to actually stop the storm altogether, but it was a breather, and that was better than nothing. Which was why he nearly jumped out of his skin when one day he found himself with some very unwelcome company. "Huh. Didn't expect to see you here," Technoblade said as soon as he stepped through the door, golden eyes quickly finding Wilbur sequestered in the far corner. Wilbur, who had been skimming a text on Flosslium, fought the urge to flinch. "I can leave," he offered, straightening up in his chair. To his disappointment, Technoblade shook his head. "Nah, that's fine. I was just surprised, that's all." Damn it. Wilbur wouldn't be able to focus on his book with the fucking Imperator sitting only a few feet away from him. Still, he kept his mouth shut as Technoblade grabbed a hollow pad off of one of the desks and settled himself down a few chairs over from Wilbur's own. Despite the fact that he'd left plenty of space between the two of them, Wilbur could feel his presence like electric currents running over his skin, and he wanted nothing more than to run out of the library and back to his room. Technoblade didn't say anything as he rested the hollow pad against his legs, tapping a few buttons to pull up whatever book he wanted to read. Wilbur stared at him through his fringe, wondering what the Imperator was playing at here. Was this some kind of power play? A reminder that Wilbur couldn't have his own space anywhere in the palace? Or was he trying to keep an eye on Wilbur? Maybe he wanted to find out what he was reading, and was going to check the history of the holopad after Wilbur left. Although it's not like that would do them any good. He doubted Technoblade and Philzip would get much use out of the fact that he was reading a book on the history of Flosslium's government. As the questions bounced around Wilbur's head, Technoblade shifted in his seat, and Wilbur stiffened. But then, Technoblade settled down again, and Wilbur realized he'd just been readjusting to get more comfortable. He glanced back down at the hollow pad in front of him. The words blurred together, impossible to process as he kept thinking about the piglins sitting so close to him. What was he thinking? Why wasn't Tommy with him? Or, of course, Tommy was probably off with Rombo and Amesy, but considering he spent nearly every day with Technoblade, there had to be some reason the two of them weren't training together right now. His eyes darted back up. He watched Technoblade through his dark curls, trying to get inside his head. If he was in Technoblade's shoes, why would he be in the library? Maybe it had nothing to do with him. Maybe the Imperator just wanted to read. Hi, Makia. No, that couldn't be it. He was sure Technoblade could have a holopad in his own room, loaded with every book on the planet if he wanted it. Forgot to mute my laptop. Don't worry, you're not missing much. Sage! Long time no see. 1 second, just responding to a DM. Alright. This had to be a move. Wilbur just couldn't figure out what the goal of it was. Hold on. Please tell me that it's not. Please tell me that y'all did. Okay. Wait, sad boy hours time? Oh, is that because of this story? Or... Oh, wait, no, never mind. Let's see. You know, if you take a picture, it'll last longer. Wilbur jumped at the sound of Technoblade's deep voice, before scrambling to school his face back into one of neutrality. "Excuse me?" he asked, properly lifting his head to look at Technoblade now. Okay, hold on. One second. I need to look at something. I need to look for something. Okay, I guess it has to be... Okay, sorry about that. Was just responding to... Okay, hold on. Never mind, I'll just... Claymation hydration? Alright. That was water, not my chocolate shake. Because... hydration is water only. Yep. Okay, sorry. Yep, not my shake. Do you want to hear... This is my water bottle. And this is me drinking from it. Is that proof enough for you, bitch? I would actually do webcam, but I don't have webcam. Where was I? Oh yeah. Technoblade raised a single pink eyebrow at him. "You're staring at me. You should just take a picture at this point." "I wasn't staring at you," Wilbur lied. "Trust me, you're not as subtle as you think," Technoblade told him. "You can keep staring if you want, but nothing's gonna change. I'm just here to read." Wilbur narrowed his eyes. He wanted to ask Technoblade why he was here, and what he was playing at with this. That's what he would have done if Philza pulled this move. But Technoblade wasn't Philza. At this point, he and Philza had reached a kind of understanding. He knew Philza didn't care about him being upfront and actually preferred honesty to lies meant to put up a facade. But when it came to Technoblade, Wilbur didn't know how he'd react to something like that. The last time he was blunt with him, the Imperator had tackled him to the ground and pressed a knife to his throat. Wilbur had no desire to repeat that experience anytime soon. It was going to be impossible to just sit here in silence, though. Wilbur had to say something. Anything to try and get an idea of what Technoblade was doing. "What are you reading?" Wilbur found himself asking, the words slipping out of his mouth without thought. A beat passed. Wilbur clenched his jaw. Then, "A book on the mythology of Themis," he answered, his gaze fixed on the holopad. "Themis?" Wilbur questioned, raising an eyebrow. "Why are you reading about Themis?" Technoblade shrugged. "Phil told you he was trying to contact the Themesians, right?" Wilbur nodded. "Well, we've just been talking about them a lot, so I've been trying to do a bit of research on their culture. The little bits of mythology I've heard seem pretty interesting, so..." He trailed off, holding the holopad up for a moment before setting it back down on his lap. Well, Wilbur supposed that made sense, but how do you even have a book on Themesian mythology? Unlike most of the other planets in the galaxy, Themis was not one that openly shared its history and accomplishments with everyone else. It was closed off. In order to visit the planet, you either needed to be a diplomat invited there by the royal family, or you had to go through the arduous process of getting a visa approval, which was said to be next to impossible if you didn't have any Themesian blood in you. The only reason Wilbur knew as much about Themis as he did was thanks to Nikki. The ambassadors were reluctant to teach him anything about the planet his mother came from, but, unlike him, Nikki was a full-blooded siren. So the ambassadors would regularly pull her away for private tutoring sessions on its history. The fact that Technoblade claimed to have a book on Themesian mythology in his hands right at that moment, it was unusual to say the least. Hold on, I want a chicken nugget. I really hope y'all can't hear the sounds of me chewing. I could have just turned off my mic, now that I think about it. Oh well. Love the world building in this fic. Me too, actually. It's really interesting. At the question, Technoblade simply shrugged again. "We have our ways." That was ominous. The fact that Technoblade wasn't going into detail implied that he hadn't gotten the book through normal methods. If Wilbur had to take a guess, he'd say it was possibly smuggled off the planet and sold through a black market. Something of that sort. Oh no, I will cry. God, anytime that I saw Makia post fan art in the fan art channel on my Discord once, and I was this close to like bursting into tears. What is your Discord? The invite might be expired, but if you type in !socials, my Discord is in there. Hold on. If it is expired, let me see if there's a way. But let me know if it's expired. And if it is, I will try and fix it. Which also begged another question. Is that translated into Common? Wilbur asked, knowing that most Themesian texts were written in Royal Themesian for the sole purpose of making them unreadable to outsiders. You sure ask a lot of questions, Technoblade muttered, although he didn't look as annoyed as his words made him sound. Yes, it's translated, but it's not perfect. There are sections of it that weren't able to be translated, so I'm just kinda skipping over those. Wilbur blinked. He could stay silent. He could hum and go back to his book, accepting that that wasn't his problem. He really didn't give a shit if Technoblade was able to read a book on Themesian mythology. It literally didn't affect him at all. And offering to help was just going to make Technoblade think he liked him or something, which certainly wasn't the case. But Wilbur was curious about what the book said. Fuck. Sighing, Wilbur pushed out of his seat and walked over to Technoblade's chair. Give me an untranslated section, he said. All it does is take me to Discord, no invite? Okay. Hold on, let me try and fix that. Let's see. Invite people. Oh. I'm gonna have to remember to update the invite link every 7 days. So. Okay. And then. Let's go here. HTTPS linktr.ee. I just realized I could have just taken it from my own chat on my laptop, but that's fine. Oh wait, shoot, hold on. I think I actually need to go into Linktree, like into my own account. Linktree. Login. Yeah, it definitely expired. Log in. Download the app? No thanks. Edit this. Oh shoot, wait, that's not the Control V. There we go. Okay. Okay, it should be updated now. Let me try it. Let me try it. I think it should work. I think it's working now. Now that I've updated the invite link. Let me know if there's any other issues. Oh, cool. I saw that you got in. Nice. All right. Give me an untranslated section, he said, holding his hand out for the hollow pad. Glancing up, Technoblade furrowed his brows. You know Royal Themesian? I'm shit at speaking it, but I can read it decently well, Wilbur explained, hand still outstretched. A moment passed as Technoblade stared at him, clearly debating whether or not to give him the hollow pad. Then, after a few beats, he relented and handed it over. Looking down at the text, Wilbur read the passage in his head, furrowing his brows as he tried to figure out how to read it in common. It wasn't a particularly difficult passage to read, and it was actually a myth he already knew, but it leaned very heavily into the royal dialect as opposed to the standard Themesian that was spoken in the capital, so he supposed that must have been why it wasn't able to be translated. It says... Wait, Technoblade said, holding up a hand as he reached for the hollow pad. Do you mind if I record you? That way we can put the translation in. Oh. Well, Wilbur supposed that made sense. That's fine. Wilbur nodded. With that, Technoblade tapped a button on the side of the hollow pad, and a red blinking light appeared to indicate it was recording. Then Wilbur took a deep breath and began to read. It says, the birth of the sirens is attributed to the command the mother Messira gave to the oceans of Themis. Using her voice, she instructed the sea foam to create life, and the sea foam turned into the first of the sirens. Infused with the power of Messira's voice, these daughters of the sea were able to channel her voice through themselves. Sea foam runs through the blood of a siren, and that is what grants her the ability to use Messira's voice as her own. The first queen of Themis, a siren known as Otrera, thought herself as powerful as Messira, and wanted to use the voice Messira gifted her to create life herself. In her arrogance, she commanded the waves that lapped upon the black sand shores to create life. But Messira heard this command and was upset that her daughter did not have faith in her mother. For Otrera was worried that there would not be enough sirens to live on, even though Messira knew how to keep her daughter safe. And so, the command was followed, but Messira hindered the waves so that the creation was flawed. The sirens that emerged from the waves were not perfect like Otrera or the others. Instead, they were sons of the ocean, and from that day forward, a siren could not use the voice to create life. That was Messira's punishment for her daughters. Once Wilbur finished reading, he cleared his throat and handed the hollow pad back to Technoblade. With that, Technoblade turned off the recording and looked up at Wilbur. Geez, so the existence of men is supposed to be a punishment to the women of Themis? Technoblade asked, raising an eyebrow. Pretty much. Wilbur shrugged. Of course, that's just mythology. Scientifically speaking, Themis is well aware sirens did not spring out of the ocean, but that was what the old belief said. Humming, Technoblade set the hollow pad back down in his lap. Well, thanks for that. Would have had no way to read that otherwise. Letting out a slow breath, Wilbur nodded and shuffled back to his own chair. But this time, he didn't pick up his holopad again to pretend to read, and Technoblade didn't go back to reading his own either. Instead, they stared at each other. A silent standoff for, well, Wilbur wasn't sure. Was Technoblade waiting to see if he would say something else? Or did he want Wilbur to leave? After nearly a full minute of dead air, Technoblade finally spoke up. "You've been spending a lot of time with Phil lately." Huh. Admittedly, Wilbur had not expected Technoblade to go down that route. "It's not exactly of my own volition," Wilbur said, setting the holopad on his legs off to the side. "I can't ignore a summons from him. Visiting K4 with him the other night wasn't something he summoned you to do," Technoblade pointed out, giving him a flat stare. Wilbur winced. Of course Technoblade knew about that. "Well, what else am I supposed to do when you're taking up all of my little brother's free time?" Wilbur challenged, trying to change the subject. "I take it you're not a fan of our training sessions?" Technoblade asked. Clenching his jaw, Wilbur shook his head. "No, I'm not. I don't trust you, and I don't trust your intentions with him." Despite the barb, Technoblade's face remained impassive. "You think I'm manipulating him?" It wasn't a question, but Wilbur still answered it like one. "Yes, I do. I think you're trying to get in his head to make him trust you, and I'm not very happy about it." At this, Technoblade huffed, and he pushed out of his chair. Wilbur stiffened, thinking he was going to walk towards him, but instead was taken back when he realized Technoblade was turning to leave the library. Hold on a second. Sorry, I'm just reading something. This may take a while. Huh, sorry, that took a while to read. If you're curious about context, not the time. I'd say. Sure, you'll find it on Twitter at some point or another. Prince Orpheus, Technoblade said, his back to Wilbur as he headed towards the doors. I hate to break it to you, but it doesn't really matter if you like it or not. Theseus is the one seeking me out, so if you want him to stop spending time with me, you're gonna have to take that up with him. And with that, Technoblade left the library, the doors hissing as they slid shut behind him. Now alone, Wilbur stared at the hollow pad on his lap. The chair across from him was empty, and there was no sign of life in the library save for the sound of his own breathing. Wilbur was lucky the hollow pad didn't break when he slammed it on the table. Another day passed before Wilbur and Tommy received a summons. It was becoming less common for them to be together during the day, but this was one of the rare occasions where they were both simply sitting in their room doing, well, for lack of a better word, nothing. Hold on, there's like something on my screen. I'm trying to like get it off. There we go. It had been a quiet day. Tommy had gotten back from training after only a few hours, explaining that Technoblade told him he had other business he needed to attend to. Wilbur had nodded, before going back to reading the book he had taken from the library several days before. Things between him and Tommy... Oh, wait, no, I'd already said that. Or had I? No. Things between him and Tommy were... tense. They weren't outright fighting, but ever since that night where Tommy had pleaded with Wilbur to talk to him and Wilbur refused, it was like Tommy had stopped trying to get through to him altogether. With negotiations on hold, there wasn't much left for them to talk about. It was foreign in the worst way possible. Back on Eldingvegger, Tommy would ramble to Wilbur about anything and everything, tripping over his own words as sentences tumbled out of his mouth like he had been put on 2 times speed. In turn, Tommy would listen to Wilbur go on and on about whatever new subject he was most interested in at the time. It was a careful balance they had spent years of perfecting. But now the balance had been thrown off. Every word shared between them was stilted, the air between them thick with disappointments and dropped expectations. It was like every time Tommy spoke, all Wilbur could hear was how badly he was failing him. A waver in his voice, a shudder running down his spine. Signs that Tommy was frustrated with his older brother in a way he'd never been before. So the two didn't speak much these days. When the summons arrived, Tommy was sitting on the bed with a hollow pad on his lap, while Wilbur did the same on the couch. The room was dead silent, so the knock at the door was startling enough to make Wilbur jump in his seat. He got up before Tommy could, opening the doors to see Jack Manifold waiting on the other side. "Gentlemen, the Emperor wants to see you both." Biting back a sigh, Wilbur stepped back to grab his shoes, as he listened to Tommy shuffling off the bed and doing the same. A few minutes later, they were following Jack down the halls. While a part of Wilbur knew his mind should be racing as he tried to figure out what they were being summoned for this time, his thoughts were strangely still. The storm was still there, anger and sadness and frustration spinning inside his skull like a hurricane with no eye. But it was almost as if Wilbur had become so used to it that it was just background noise. His actual thoughts were buzzing, but not with any particular idea about what was going on. Just that they were being summoned, and he would find out what it was about soon enough. Chicken nugget time. Beats me, dude. A glance to his left revealed nothing about what Tommy was thinking at that moment. His face was entirely impassive, and where Wilbur used to be able to read his brother like a little book, his little brother like a book, now he was nothing more than a blank page to him. He stared straight ahead, and Wilbur knew that it was supposed to hurt, that his chest was supposed to ache, and he was supposed to long for the times when the air between them wasn't so cold. Can I draw? Of course you can! There's no, specific way that you can draw, that you need to draw me. Hell, if you want to draw me as a clown, go ahead. It'd be funny. Art has no limits. Just don't be weird. That's really the only thing about, fan art. Just don't be weird. He was supposed to long for the times when the air between them wasn't so cold. But he was just numb. It wasn't long before they reached the throne room. Puffy was waiting for them outside, and Jack dipped his head to her before taking a step back. The brothers knew the routine, and waited for Puffy to guide them into the throne room. There was a pause, though. When you enter, you're only to speak Common. If you try to speak any other language, that's grounds for suspicion of conspiracy, Puffy suddenly said, her face far more serious than Wilbur had ever seen it. We've literally only been speaking Common since we got here, Tommy pointed out, frowning at her. Why would anything be different now? Puffy tensed. You'll understand in a minute. And that was all the explanation they got before the doors were sliding open, and Puffy was gesturing for them to follow her inside. Inside the throne room, Philza and Technoblade were in their usual spots. The dark black wings stretching out behind Philza's metal throne seemed glossier than usual, and both he and Technoblade were both wearing more jewelry than they usually did. This was almost impressive for Technoblade, considering how much gold jewelry he almost always had on him. Emeralds hung from both their ears. Silver rings adorned Philza's fingers, and gold thread was braided into Technoblade's hair. It didn't take a genius to figure out that this was formal court attire, and Wilbur's eyes widened as he realized that this was far more formal of a summons than either of them had received in a long time. Prince Theseus, Prince Orpheus, Philza began, and Wilbur tried not to think of how strange it was to hear Philza say his title for the first time in so long. Apologies for the sudden call, but we weren't given much time to prepare for this. Wilbur narrowed his eyes. And what exactly is this? He asked, replying to Philza before Tommy could. I feel like we're a little underdressed for whatever's going on. At this, Technoblade huffed. You have bigger things to be thinking about right now than how you're dressed. The annoyance sputtered out in Wilbur's chest as something icy swept through him in its place. What's going on? Tommy then asked, his voice much lower than Wilbur's had been. You know how I told you that we've been trying to get in contact with Themis? Philza questioned. Both Wilbur and Tommy nodded. Well, we finally got through. We were told to be ready to call with an official from the planet as soon as possible. Holy shit. Holy shit. Despite the tension between him and Tommy, the two of them shared an identical look of shock at the news. Puffy's warning suddenly made sense, considering both he and Tommy were able to speak Royal Themesian, albeit not very well. More importantly, though, Wilbur hadn't been expecting Philza's attempts to actually work. Themis was closed off because they didn't care about the rest of the galaxy. If they had something to gain from working with other planets, they would. Otherwise, it wasn't something they'd bother to concern themselves with. Most planets were content to let them be. After all, no one wanted to mess with a planet filled with people who could control someone's actions through their voice alone. Wilbur had assumed that Themis didn't care about Wilbur or Tommy. That's because they presumably had kept the Blazophane trade arrangement with Dream. The two of them were no concern to the planet, and therefore they wouldn't have any interest in talking to Philza. One second. Okay. Apparently, this wasn't the case. Wait. If Themis actually cared about him and Tommy, maybe they would have a chance. If they had Themis on their side, that would give them far more leverage than what they had before. Hope began to bloom in Wilbur's chest for the first time in ages. It was subtle, but it was there. It was then Wilbur noticed that there was a small disc settled on the ground a few feet in front of Philza's throne. A hollow disc, no doubt, meant for formal calls like this. So how long until they... Tommy's question was cut off by a soft beeping coming from the disc on the floor. Immediately, Technoblade gestured for Wilbur and Tommy to come stand by the throne, and the two did so to ensure they were in full view of the hollow disc as it lit up. Intergalactic call incoming. Source, Themis. Do you accept? A robot female voice said, echoing out from the holodisc. Feathers ruffling, Philza nodded. Yes, I accept. The beeping cut off. Sometimes I forget there's trains up here. I'm not used to there being trains back home. And the window's open, so I don't know if you could hear the train, but I did. blue light got bright from the base of the disc, creating a single beam that reached the ceiling, before spreading out and scanning the room. Wilbur blinked as the scanner swept over him, and looked to his right to see Tommy flinch at the sudden light in his eyes. Then, the scanning was done. A single beam returned, before it expanded out to form a hollow screen made up of hundreds of small floating lights. There was a single figure present in the hologram. She seemed young, close to Wilbur's age. Dark hair cascaded down her shoulders in shiny curls, with deep green eyes set above a splattering of freckles over her nose, which no doubt would glow even brighter than Wilbur's or Tommy's in the dark. Along with this, her hair was partially covered by a veil made of small pearls strung together like a net. Small red flowers were twisted between the strings tying the pearls together, and a thin gold band shaped the leaves of a laurel wreath wrapped around her head on top of the veil. A headpiece as opulent as this no doubt signified a very high status. "Are you receiving me?" Philza asked as soon as the hologram stopped flickering. The woman nodded. "Yes, I am. Are you receiving me?" Her voice was tinged with the metal that came with speaking over a holodisc, but even with that, Wilbur could still sense power humming under her words. It was impossible for a siren to use the voice over a call, but Wilbur could just tell that her voice was extremely strong. "We are receiving you," Philza confirmed, pushing to his feet. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I'm Philza, Emperor of the Antarctic Empire, and this is Technoblade, Imperator of the Antarctic Empire." Philza and Technoblade both bowed at her as they introduced themselves. Wilbur noticed how neither one of them introduced him or Tommy. At least, not yet. "I'm aware of who you both are," the woman said, her tone not rude, but nothing close to kind either. "I'm Marina Hanna, Crown Princess of Themis. My mother is preoccupied with other business, so you'll be speaking with me on the matter you contacted us about." Oh. This was Hanna, the woman next in line for the throne to Themis. Not to mention, she was also his and Tommy's cousin. Wilbur didn't miss the slight dip in her words when she said her mother was preoccupied. He thought back to the conversation he and Nikki had the night before Eldingvegger was invaded. How foolish let it slip that Queen Marina was sick. While it was possible that she had improved and actually was dealing with other business, Wilbur knew it was far more likely that she was still ill, and Hanna was preparing to take over her duties. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Princess Marie. Well, I suppose I could call you Princess Hanna, just to avoid any confusion with your mother. Is that all right?" Philza asked, sitting back down on his throne. Even through the hologram, Wilbur didn't miss the way Hanna's brows twitched at this. "No, that is not all right," she snapped, her words low but sharp enough to cut through stone. "You will only refer to me as Princess Marina. Is that understood?" What the fuck? Did she really just speak to Philza, the ruler of the second largest empire in the galaxy, like that? To Wilbur's surprise, Philza paled at this. He nodded, and as strange as it was, he looked sheepish, embarrassed as well. That was wrong. Philza wasn't one to be spoken down to. Not with the quiet confidence that practically radiated off of him, telling everyone around him he was someone too powerful to be messed with. My apologies, Princess Marina, Filza corrected, clenching his jaw. Satisfaction flickered through Hannah's eyes, making them almost glow. That's better, she hummed, leaning back in her seat. Now, I've been told by my advisors that you've granted the Princes of Eldingvegor asylum on Zephys IV to protect them from Emperor Dream. Is that correct? Filza nodded. Yes, that is correct. For the first time since the call began, Hannah's gaze shifted, and Wilbur straightened up when her eyes landed on him and Tommy. Filza noticed this, and gestured to both of them. Boys, introduce yourselves to Princess Marina, he ordered. Looking at Tommy, Wilbur gave him a nod, telling him to go first. But when Tommy stepped forward, Hannah spoke up. Shouldn't the older one go first? She asked, furrowing her brows. Tommy froze, eyes going wide while Wilbur's breathing hitched. There was an awkward beat of silence. Tommy shot a pleading look at Wilbur, silently asking him what to do now. Clearing his throat, Wilbur stepped forward. My younger brother is the one who has the title of Crown Prince of Eldingvegor, so it's court etiquette for him to introduce himself first, he explained, before stepping back where he was. Hannah let out a soft, almost mocking laugh at that. I don't really care what your Eldingvegor titles dictate. By Themesian standards, you're older, so you're the one who should introduce yourself first. Well, that was strange. But also another example of how Themis really didn't care about other planets besides their own. Without a word, Tommy stepped back so their shoulders were brushing. Wilbur curled his hand into a fist before forcing himself to step forward again. Orpheus Wilbur-Sooty, Prince of Eldingvegor, he introduced, bowing before straightening back up. Sooty? Hannah questioned. My Eldingvegor name, Wilbur explained. The late king, my younger brother's father, gave it to me when I first arrived on the planet. Understanding dawned on Hannah's face. Ah, I see. With that, Wilbur took a step back, and Tommy repeated what he'd done before to introduce himself. I'm Theseus Thomas Ione, Crown Prince of Eldingvegor. His bow was deeper than Wilbur's, although Wilbur could see how he was twisting his fingers into the hem of his jacket to try and hide his nerves. He moved back beside Wilbur. Their shoulders were pressed tightly together, and if things weren't so strange between them right now, Wilbur was sure Tommy would have grabbed his hand for reassurance. His hand stayed empty, though. There was a beat of silence as Hannah stared at them both. Through the screen, her face was unreadable. Her eyes skimmed them up and down. Something akin to curiosity settled behind the green. But curiosity might have been too gentle of a word for it. There was an intent in the way she looked at them, almost as if they were made of glass, and she was staring straight through them both. Dream has been looking for them, Hannah said after a moment, eyes flickering back to Filza and Technoblade. I was told that Dream intended on executing them both, Filza told her. The hope in his chest sparked again. Would she be upset? She'd have to be. If Themis cared enough to call with Philza, that meant something. They wanted to know what was going on with him and Tommy. There was actual value placed on their lives. If Themis knew Dream intended on killing them, that didn't bode well for Asempi. Yes, we were aware of his plans. Hannah nodded, not the slightest hint of surprise on her face. And just like that, the hope was snuffed out almost as quickly as it was lit. It was like being doused in cold water. Ice clawed up his spine and wrapped around his chest, and it took everything in his power not to wince. Philza seemed somewhat taken aback by how bluntly she said it as well. He blinked a few times before his wings stretched out again, and he shifted in his seat. And you didn't have a problem with that? Dream's not stupid. He contacted us before the invasion with his plans. He contacted us before the invasion with his plans. His contact inside Eldingvegor told him about our arrangement with the planet, which I'm sure Orpheus and Theseus told you about already. He promised the Blazophane arrangement we had wouldn't change with his takeover, and that was really the whole reason we had the two of them on Eldingvegor in the first place. Hannah explained, no emotion whatsoever in her words. Beside him, Tommy was stiff. Wilbur felt like he was going to be sick. So you only care about the Blazophane agreement you have with Eldingvegor, not Orpheus and Theseus? Philza asked, raising an eyebrow. Pretty much. Neither one of them is anywhere near the throne in terms of succession order. On the other side of Philza, Wilbur could see Technoblade was frowning deeply at how casual she was about all of this. Despite Wilbur's own conflicted feelings towards Technoblade, he had to admit, that made the ache a little less prominent. There was a moment of silence as Philza watched the hologram. His eyes narrowed and talons tapping the arms of his chair. His eyes were like chips of ice, cold calculations running through them as he his eyes were like chips of ice, cold calculations running through them as he watched the siren through the screen. Say, from a completely hypothetical standpoint, that I were to push Asempi out of Eldingvegor and take the planet for the Antarctic Empire. If I agreed to keep whatever Blazophane agreement you already have the same as it is, would you be alright with that? At this, the corners of Hannah's lips quirked up in a small smile. You sound pretty confident in your ability to chase Asempi out like that. Trust me, Technoblade cut in, speaking up for the first time since the call began. We can do that. The smile grew wider. Well, like I said, our main concern is the Blazophane agreement. If that stays in place, we don't really care who rules Eldingvegor. Philza nodded. And the princes? Do whatever you want with the princes. They're not really our concern, Hannah said, waving her hand in the air. Fuck. It wasn't like Wilbur had expected much from Themis, but the blow was still crushing all the same. For just a moment, he'd been stupid enough to let himself hope that they had a chance. That after reaching a breaking point, they finally had a leg up in their negotiations. But that wasn't the case. No one cared what happened to them. Not a single person. Chicken nugget time. They've grown cold. In the end, it was the same as always had been. Wilbur was a lonely pillar in the sea, but now his lighthouse, Tommy, had fallen into the water with him. The waves were beating at their sides, and when they both were completely swallowed by the salt and brine, no one was going to remember they'd ever been there. Not even the other lonely pillar that had kept him upright. Wait. Nikki. Oh, hi. Forgot to mention I'm alive. It shouldn't be an issue though. I'm just reading. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that, chat. That was my roommate. If that's all you wanted to discuss, then I think Princess Marina. Wilbur interrupted, stepping right up to the hollow screen. The emissary to the Order of Anthemisa. The emissary to the Order of Anthemisa, Lady Nichu. She was imprisoned by Dream when my brother and I escaped. Was she taken back to Themis? Is she there? Is Nikki somewhere beyond that screen, wondering why Wilbur abandoned her? As if a switch had been flipped, Hannah's smile disappeared. The emissary was supposed to be transported back to Themis as soon as the windy season on Eldingvegar ended. Hannah explained, her voice tight. Wilbur felt the blood drain from his face. She was supposed to be transported back to Themis, but she wasn't. What happened? Wilbur whispered, dread crawling up the back of his throat. There was a complication, Hannah said. The complication being that she broke out of the room she was being kept in, killed several guards, and stole a ship before flying off planet. What the fuck? Hannah huffed. That's what I said too when I found out. She managed to escape during one of those short windows you have when the winds die down, so Dream wasn't able to follow her. There was movement in the corner of his eye as Tommy stepped up next to him. Where the fuck is she then? We don't know, Hannah told them. We've been trying to find her for weeks now, but she could be anywhere in the galaxy. Wait, can we back up? Who's Lady Nichu? Technoblade suddenly asked. Golden eyes narrowed at Wilbur. Just a Themesian ambassador who was on Eldingvegar at the time of the takeover, Hannah explained, her words careful. As she was the youngest member of the group, she was kept unaware of the invasion, unlike the others. Wow. So all the ambassadors except for Nikki knew. Fucking unbelievable. But if she's the Mesian, why did Dream imprison her? Philza asked, furrowing his brows. Why do you care? She's not yours to worry about. She's a siren. Hannah asked. I mean, they're sirens too, Technoblade pointed out, gesturing in Wilbur and Tommy's direction. This made Hannah scoff. A half-siren who grew up on an entirely different planet isn't a true Themesian, she said, venom lacing her voice. Consider the princes yours. They're not Themis' problem anymore. And with that, the hologram disappeared as the call was cut. A suffocating silence fell over the room. Wilbur's mind was racing again, thoughts of Nikki buzzing around his head as he tried to think of where she could be. This whole time he'd thought that she was back on Themis. Maybe she was still on Ildingvecker, but either way, Wilbur had been holding on to hope that he knew that he would know wherever she was. But now he knew that wasn't the case. Nikki was gone. Not even Themis knew where she was, and if they couldn't find her, Wilbur certainly wouldn't be able to either. Do you ever think about where you would go if you didn't have to be here? Wilbur remembered asking late one night, while he and Nikki were laying side by side on the floor of his room. His voice was almost gone from all the practicing he'd done with Nikki over the past hour. Still, he forced the question out, ignoring the way it scraped against his throat. What do you mean? Nikki asked, turning her head to face him. The lights in his room were turned off. Both their faces were lit up by their glowing freckles, and Wilbur wondered whose were brighter. If you didn't have to stay on Ildingvecker, and you didn't have to go back to Themis either, Wilbur explained. If you were free to just do what you want. Nikki furrowed her brows, turning to look back up at the ceiling. I don't know. Maybe Flosslium? Amesy said it's pretty. She paused, pushing a strand of hair back from her face. It would depend on who I was with, though. How so? Wilbur asked. Well, if it was just you and me, I think we could have some fun exploring places with a lot of history, like Kinoko, Nikki explained, her voice soft. But if Tommy was with us, we'd probably want to go somewhere with cooler stuff so he wasn't bored the whole time. Wilbur laughed. I think he'd like the giant mushrooms on Kinoko, but I get what you mean. Another pause. What if you were alone, though? Alone? Nikki questioned. Wilbur nodded, and she sighed. I don't think I'd want to go anywhere if I was alone. I think I'd just be too sad to enjoy anything because I'd miss you and Tommy too much. You're such a fucking nerd, Wilbur teased, and Nikki punched him lightly in the arm, making him laugh. The laughter died down after a few moments. Wilbur considered what she said. Yeah, I get it, though, Wilbur murmured, letting his eyes flutter shut as he imagined jetting off into space with Nikki and Tommy by his side. I don't think I'd want to be alone either. Well, I guess you could call that a productive call, Technoblade said, deadpanned, the silence clattering to the floor. Jolted back to the present, Wilbur had to blink a few times to get his bearings as he focused back in on what Philza and Technoblade were saying. Philza huffed. I suppose so. We got the answers we needed at the very least. Pushing out of his throne, he stretched out his wings behind him, the tips of his feathers reaching far enough to almost brush Wilbur's nose. Although now I'm wondering about this Lady Niachu, and why neither of you have brought her up before. Wilbur clenched his jaw. She wasn't relevant to our conversations. I only asked Princess Marina about her because I wanted to know if she was alright. From what the princess said, it seems like Lady Niachu can more than handle herself, Technoblade commented, folding his arms over his chest. But I still don't understand. But I still don't understand why Dream would imprison a Themesian, Philza muttered, furrowing his brows. It's because she tried to help us escape the night of the invasion. The first night of the invasion. Tommy cut in. At this, both Philza and Technoblade raised their eyebrows. Oh, I see, Philza said, nodding to himself. Yeah, that would make sense, I guess. Technoblade's eyes were narrowed, and Wilbur could see that he had more questions. Whether they were questions about Nikki, or questions about the entire interaction with Hannah in general, Wilbur wasn't sure. Either way, though, it didn't seem like he was going to voice his thoughts just yet, which made it a moot point in the end. I think Techno and I need some time to discuss some things in private, Philza suddenly said, rolling out his shoulders. You two can go back to your room. That's all we needed for you today. A drink break. Always good. Wilbur didn't bother getting worked up over how much the dismissal felt like being brushed off by a parent. His chest was aching and his head was going far too fast to handle talking to either Philza or Technoblade right now, so he was grateful for the out he was being given. Puffy, who had been waiting by the door like a silent sentinel during the entire call, gestured for them to follow her. There was something sad lining her face. Sympathy, possibly? Wilbur wasn't sure what it was, but her lips were pressed tightly together, and it almost seemed like it pained her to meet their eyes. Philza's eyes bored into the back of his head the entire way out the door. Once they were out of the throne room and the door slid shut behind them, Puffy turned down the hallway without a word, no doubt leading them back to their room. Usually, Puffy didn't speak to them when she was taking them from place to place. She wasn't like Jack with his casual snark and lack of formality. Instead, she was the picture-perfect guard, seeing everything yet saying nothing. Right now, Wilbur was grateful for the silence. He desperately needed time to process everything that had just happened. The numbness from earlier was gone, with dread pouring into every crack and crevice of his crumbling foundation. Of course, Wilbur couldn't get what he wanted for very long. But because as they turned the corner back into the main hallway, they ran into someone Wilbur absolutely did not want to see right now. Gold thread birds glittered in the light pouring from the palace windows. Quackity was leaning against the wall, arms folded over his chest with one hand held up to an earpiece settled in his ear. Hold on, I'm gonna have to call you back, Quackity said into the earpiece as soon as his eyes landed on Wilbur and Tommy. He tapped the device before pushing off the wall, looking them both up and down as a mocking smile slipped on his face. Damn, you two look like you just came back from a funeral. Wilbur grit his teeth. In a way, they were coming back from a funeral. A funeral for themselves, for their chances of actually avoiding what was quickly turning into an inevitable fate. Shut up, Wilbur hissed, stopping dead in his tracks. Tommy and Puffy both froze mid-step. Quackity's smile grew. Bad news then, I'm guessing? Letting out a slow breath through his nose, Wilbur glared at Quackity instead of answering. Hey man, I'm just trying to make conversation, Quackity said after a beat, holding his hands up in mock surrender. I told you to leave us alone, Wilbur spat, curling his hands into fists. So go kindly fuck off. You know, you're awfully hostile for someone who's supposed to be good at negotiations, Quackity pointed out, furrowing his brows. Maybe that's why your negotiations are going so badly here. If you want people to work with you, it tends to help if they like you. Oh, that piece of shit. Wilbur wasn't exactly sure what happened next. One moment he was staring at Quackity, and the next he was surging towards him, grabbing him by the front of his shirt and pinning him against the wall. Quackity's back slammed into the stone. Wilbur's blood was roaring in his ears. The anger thrumming through his veins was boiling hot and such a sharp contrast from the numbness that had swallowed his entire body. Wilbur! Tommy shouted. At the same time, Puffy yelled, Hey! And suddenly, there were hands grabbing his arms, and Wilbur was physically yanked away from Quackity. Puffy pinned his wrists behind his back, her grip like iron, despite how much smaller than him she was. He could feel bruises blooming on his skin, and he winced. But before he could try to get away from her, Quackity was storming him again. Quackity! Before Puffy could say anything, pain exploded his right cheek. Wilbur fell to the side, only being kept upright by Puffy's hold. His head was spinning, but the sharp sting of the punch had chased out the haze that had seemed like a permanent part of his mind. Don't you ever fucking touch me again! Quackity snarled, although he was a little more than a blob in Wilbur's blurred vision. Suddenly, there was a flash of blonde rushing towards Quackity. Keep your hands off my brother! Tommy shouted, shoving Quackity away from Wilbur. The hands around his wrists disappeared as Puffy ran to grab Tommy. Wilbur stumbled as he straightened back up, blinking a few times to get his bearings. His vision came back into focus, and he could see that Puffy was physically holding Tommy back from fighting Quackity. Suddenly, Okay, enough! Whipping his head to the source of the new voice, all of the air left Wilbur's lungs when he saw Philza and Technoblade standing at the end of the hall. There was a heavy silence as the entire group froze, Puffy holding on to Tommy, Tommy no longer trying to get to Quackity, and Quackity standing as still as a statue. Philza's icy eyes swept over the four of them before he and Technoblade walked over. Neither one said anything as Technoblade gestured for Puffy to let Tommy go, and as soon as he was free of her grip, Technoblade had a hand on Tommy's shoulder and gave him a pointed look. A silent warning not to try that again. Meanwhile, Philza was looking between Quackity, Tommy, and Wilbur like he was struggling to piece together what he was seeing. What the fuck just happened? He asked, finally glancing back at Puffy. There was a physical altercation, Your Majesty, Puffy explained, bowing her head. Prince Orpheus pushed Quackity and I pulled him off, but then Quackity took the opportunity to punch Prince Orpheus, and Prince Theseus shoved him in retaliation. Wilbur's blood was still roaring in his ears. The cold air of the palace stung the raw skin on his cheek. Philza's eyes narrowed. He and Technoblade shared an unreadable glance, before Technoblade was letting go of Tommy, and both of them were walking towards Quackity. Fear flashed in Quackity's dark eyes, but he didn't move as Technoblade grabbed him by the shoulder and slammed him against the wall, just like Wilbur had done only minutes before. Phil's wings were spread out as far as they could go, and they arched over his head as he met Quackity's eyes. Is what Puffy said true? Did you punch Prince Orpheus? Philza asked, a warning clear in his tone. Quackity clenched his jaw. He attacked me first. But Puffy already pulled him off of you. Puffy had already pulled him off of you. Technoblade pointed out. He wasn't a threat anymore, and yet you hit him anyway. This time, Quackity faltered for a response. He opened his mouth to argue, but seemed to think better of it and closed it after a moment. Then, Philza was reaching out. He grabbed Quackity by the chin, forcing him to look up to meet his eyes with talons pressing so hard they were nearly breaking the skin. We might have an agreement, Quackity, but all agreements can be broken. Philza hissed, his words aligned with a razor's edge. You are a guest of the Antarctic Empire. While you are here, you're at mine and Techno's mercy. Do you understand that? Despite Quackity trying to keep up a poker face, the fear in his eyes was as plain as day. I understand. Good. Then remember this, Philza said, tightening his grip on Quackity's chin. Prince Orpheus is under the protection of the Empire. He is mine. The same goes for Prince Theseus as well. If you lay a finger on either of them again, it will be treated with the same weight as if you harmed me or Techno. That's the nice way of saying if you hurt one of them again, I'm gonna give you another scar to match the first one, Technoblade told him, resting one hand on the sword sheathed at his hip. Quackity sucked in a sharp breath, but he nodded, knowing there was no other choice for him than to agree. All right, fine. It won't happen again. A beat passed as Philza stared at Quackity, as if he wasn't sure whether to believe him or not. Then, he dropped his hand from Quackity's chin and stepped back. Technoblade let go of his shoulder, and Quackity winced as he straightened up. After brushing himself off, he sent one last look at Wilbur, anger and frustration mixing together into something altogether sour on his face. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he just stalked off down the hallway, his footsteps slowly fading away. With Quackity gone, Philza immediately turned to Wilbur. Nausea once again rose in the back of his throat as those icy eyes looked him over. His anger had faded already, and was left with only a sore jaw and bruised ego to show for it. He'd lost his temper. Once more, he'd made a fool of himself in front of the people he couldn't afford to slip up in front of at all. Orpheus, let me see your face, Philza ordered. His voice was softer than it had been when he was speaking to Quackity, but there was a tightness underlying it that told Wilbur not to argue with him right now. Wilbur had to hunch over so he and Philza were eye to eye. The Emperor eyed the side of his face Quackity had punched, which was no doubt going to bruise later, and brought a hand up to trace the marks with his talons. Have you ever been punched before? Philza asked, his talons feather light against Wilbur's skin. Not for real, Wilbur admitted. Seems like you took the punch pretty well then, at least for first time, Philza muttered, slowly moving his hand away. Why did you shove him? Embarrassment flooded through him, making his cheeks burn red as he fought the urge to hide his face. He was rude. Philza hummed at this. And you lost your temper. Wincing, Wilbur nodded. Yes, I lost my temper. I expect you to be able to control yourself, even in the face of adversity, Philza said, his words clipped. You should know better than to physically attack someone for being rude to you. There was a loud snort from behind him, making Philza and Wilbur both glance over to where Technoblade still had a hand on Tommy's shoulder. Have something to add, Techno? Philza asked, raising an eyebrow. I just think it's a little ironic to hear the guy who once stabbed a fork through someone's hand because he insulted me. Okay, that was a totally different situation, and you know it, Philza said, cutting Technoblade off. That guy had it fucking coming anyway. Huh? And Quackity has a knack for getting himself into trouble a lot. You could argue he had it coming too, Technoblade told him. Philza sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. That's not the point. I just want to say, he was being a prick, Tommy suddenly chimed in, and Wilbur almost smiled at how quick Tommy was to defend him. Technoblade squeezed Tommy's shoulder. Hate to say it, but you're a little biased, kid. Look, it's irrelevant whether or not he had it coming, Philza said, trying to steer the conversation back on topic. Obvious. I've said this before. You're young, but you're not stupid. You know better than this, so stop acting like you don't. Although his words were sharp, it was different from the patronizing tone he used before to scold Wilbur. This one was not gentler, but less harsh. Not as judgmental. Despite the fact that Wilbur should have been freaking out about the fact that he had lost his shit so badly in front of his enemy, he just couldn't bring himself to care that much. They had dropped the pretenses. Philza knew he was a wreck, so what was the point in keeping up appearances anymore? He thought back to what Philza had said to Quackity, how he'd described Wilbur and Tommy as his. Only minutes earlier, Hannah had said the same thing. Consider the princes yours. Although it was much more subdued than before, the coals in his chest sparked once again. I get it. It won't happen again, Wilbur said, his tone clipped. Philza nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. And I trust that. We're not yours, though. There was a heavy pause as Philza stared at him. The words that had slipped out of Wilbur's mouth without thinking, hanging in the air between them like a cloud. He hadn't meant to say that part out loud. All it would do was serve to piss Philza off more. There was no point in arguing about it when there was nothing Wilbur could do to change it. Still, he said it. And now he had to deal with the fallout. Philza cocked his head to the side in that bird-like manner once again, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Mate, is this really what you want to be hung up on? You're under our protection. It's as simple as that. But that's not what you said, Wilbur argued, knowing he was going to be kicking himself later for pushing this point. You told Quackity that we were yours, but we're not. We belong to Eldingvega. The words rang hollow, but he said them anyway. He had to hold on to that, to the belief that he and Tommy were still part of Eldingvega and would go back to it someday. They were still two brothers from the planet of eternal twilight, and nothing would take that away from them. Now is not the time to be a petty child, Orpheus, Philza said, taking a slow step towards him. The fact of the matter is that Eldingvega isn't Eldingvega right now. It's part of a Sempi, which wants you dead. Themis doesn't want you either. Your life is in my hands, and if I wanted to cut it short, no one would be able to stop me. At one point, the threat would have terrified Wilbur. It would have made his heart skip a beat in his chest, and he would have had to hide his trembling from Philza so he couldn't see how terrified he was of the man. But that time had passed. Wilbur didn't just know the game now, but he knew Philza himself. He knew what he wanted, and he knew what was truly being played here. But you're not going to, Wilbur shot back, sounding far calmer than he felt. At this, Philza's smile turned into a real one. You're right. I'm not going to. That's because I protect what's mine. My planet, my people, my Imperator, and you and your brother as well. The brief wave of satisfaction Wilbur got from fighting back was quickly washed away by Philza's words. He could only watch as Philza stepped back, nodding at Technoblade to follow him. Technoblade squeezed Tommy's shoulder one last time, giving him a look that Wilbur would almost describe as warm, if Wilbur didn't think it was impossible for Technoblade to make a face like that. The two went back to the throne room, their footsteps gradually fading out just like Quackity's had. Now it was only him, Tommy, and Puffy again. Puffy didn't say anything as she led them back to their room. Wilbur's face was starting to throb where he'd been hit, but he forced down his winces and followed in silence. Tommy was also quiet, but he wasn't as cold to Wilbur as he'd been earlier. Their hands kept brushing, and every once in a while Tommy would push their shoulders together. Although the touches were brief, they were there, and it was a small source of comfort he hadn't been expecting. Wilbur felt hollow. That was the only way he could think to describe it. It was like a huge wave had come and doused him in brine and ice, and now he was left in the cold to dry out on his own. He was defeated. He was frustrated. He was embarrassed. But once again, one feeling trumped all of the others. He was tired. They reached the door to the throne room, and Puffy paused before letting them in. Her gray-green eyes landed on his face again, and she grimaced, leading him to believe that he was already starting to bruise. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice soft. Wilbur blinked, having never heard the captain speak so gently before. "It's all right," he said, despite the fact that the throbbing was only getting worse by the second. Puffy didn't seem to believe him. "I'll have a servant bring you an ice pack," she told him. Then, before he could argue. She was turning on her heel and heading back down the hall, her curls bouncing with every step. With that, Tommy led the way into their room. As soon as the doors shut behind them, Wilbur braced himself, waiting for Tommy to yell at him. He knew it was coming. He knew he deserved to be told off for being such an impulsive idiot. It was one thing to snap during a meeting. It was something else to entirely to physically attack a person. To his surprise, though, the yelling never came. As soon as they walked into the room, Tommy turned towards the bathroom. He disappeared behind the door for a few seconds, and Wilbur heard water running on the other side. Then, he stepped out again, holding a soft cloth that had been dampened with water. "Will, get your ass over here," Tommy said, although his tone lacked its usual bite as he gestured for Wilbur to sit on the edge of the bed with him. Blinking a few times, Wilbur trudged over, sitting down next to Tommy as pain radiated through his entire skull. There was a hand on his face, turning his head to face his little brother. Tommy brought the cloth up to his throbbing cheek, and Wilbur's eyes fluttered shut when he realized that Tommy had soaked the cloth in freezing cold water. Hold on a second. Anyway, the coolness was a balm to Wilbur's overheating face. Tommy held the cloth there for a few moments, before grabbing Wilbur's hand and putting it on his cheek so he could hold it there himself. Once Tommy had moved both his hands away, Wilbur opened his eyes again. "This feels nice," Wilbur said, sounding strangely hoarse. "Good," Tommy huffed, curling his hands into fists in his lap. "I'm still fucking pissed at you. For getting into a fight with Quackity, or just everything?" "Everything," Tommy said. "You're a fucking asshole." Wilbur nodded. "I know." This made Tommy scoff. "Yeah, I know you know. You know and you don't give a shit. I call you an asshole and you think it's fine, and it's fucking stupid. You're not supposed to be fine with that." He uncurled his fists and twisted his fingers into the bottom hem of his shirt. "You tried to attack someone today. You don't do violence, Will." He was right. Wilbur had never been the type to resort to fists over words. In fact, he always took active measures to avoid physical fights whenever possible. Today had unsurfaced some ugly part of him he hadn't even known existed, and it wasn't something he was happy about. Still, though, he was tired in a way words couldn't describe. Far too tired to talk about something that heavy right now. "Do we really want to get into this again?" he asked, instead, eyes falling to his lap. Tommy was silent for a moment, fingertips turning purple when he twisted the fabric of his shirt around his knuckles. The cloth on Wilbur's cheek was already growing uncomfortably warm, so he pulled it away and shook it around the air, hoping to cool it off so he could use it again until the ice pack arrived. When he put the cloth back on his face, it was slightly cooler than before, but not by much. It was temporary relief, nothing more. I don't know why, but talking to Princess Marina today made me realize that we forgot about Vindrul, Tommy said, almost whispering with how soft his words were. Oh. Oh. You're right, Wilbur murmured, the cloth falling into his lap. It would have happened weeks ago, I think. Tommy nodded, biting the inside of his cheek. Do you think they celebrated this year? Wilbur tried to imagine it. The people of Dogsburn Stair, capital city of Eldingvegger, hanging up the decorations for a festival with the burnt remains of silverwood trees surrounding them on all sides. Would Asempi soldiers be watching them? Would they demand to search every box of garland or tapestry to make sure no one had their own weapons they could use against the soldiers? Would they even let their people have a Vindrul celebration? Maybe the Asempi soldiers wouldn't care. Maybe they would watch with disinterest as the baker laid out rows and rows of steaming hot doggerbrow loaves. Maybe they would tap their feet along to the music and laugh when children ran by their feet, squealing with joy at the fact that they could be outside again. Or maybe there wouldn't be any celebration at all, even if Dream allowed it. Because there wouldn't be anything to celebrate with Prince Theseus gone. When the king passed, there was no Vindrul celebration that year. If Dream told the people of Eldingvegger that Tommy was dead, which he had no doubt he'd done, then they would be mourning the loss of their future king deeply. It would not be a time for celebration. No, I don't think they did, Wilbur answered, running his fingers over the damp cloth. They're probably mourning you. Tommy frowned. They'd be mourning you too. Wilbur sighed, shaking his head. Tommy, we both know they're not mourning me. And Tommy knew he couldn't argue with that. There was a moment of silence. It settled across Wilbur's shoulders, heavy and stifling in a way silences used to never be with Tommy. But at least it wasn't tense. That was the little bit of relief he needed to breathe. A warm weight on his shoulders startled Wilbur out of his thoughts. He glanced down and saw Tommy leaning against his side. While he wasn't fully resting his weight on him, his head was on his shoulder, and it was the closest they'd gotten to a hug in weeks. Wilbur shifted, leaning back towards Tommy so the two were propped up against each other. Neither one said anything, but they didn't need to. For just a moment, a truce was called on the silent battle they'd been waging for days. For just a moment, they could lean against each other, thinking about the time they'd already lost on Zephys IV, and how different things could be by the time they got back. If they ever got back. If. God damn! That took almost twice the time that a normal chapter did, but that's mainly because I got so sidetracked a lot. Let's see what the notes say. Originally didn't plan to have Quackity punch Wilbur. Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Bones and the Beast. Another great chapter as always. Go follow her on Tumblr and Twitter. Show her some support there. Alright. I think that is going to be my stream. Man, this was really fun. But I'm tired. I'm probably going to play MCC Island for a couple hours before absolutely crashing. Let's see who we can raid. Who is live? Nice. Very good bedtime story. Thank you. Let's see. Apparently, Akko's doing a subathon, so... Let's raid Akko. Oh wait, he's wearing his Technoblade hoodie, which is funny because I'm wearing mine too. All right. Thank y'all so much for watching. It's really nice to know that people that follow from my Minecraft streams also enjoy my fanfic reading streams, because those I absolutely love doing, and it's just nice to know that people stick around for that and that people actually like watching it. Alright. Next stream is probably gonna be NCC Island, gonna be real. Ooh! I should make a suggestions channel on my Discord so that y'all can drop fic suggestions for stream. Came for the fanfic, stayed for the Minecraft? Based. I'm gonna set that channel up, after I end. Right. Thank y'all for watching. The raid's about to happen soon, so bye!